The fluorescent lights hum above Cedar Creek Medical like insects trapped in amber. Megan O'Brien arrives at 4:33 a.m., 43 minutes before her shift begins, moving through the cardiac wing with the kind of purposeful silence that makes people not notice you. 8 months. She's been here 8 months, and in 8 months she has learned that invisibility is a skill, like everything else. She knows the pulse of this place, the rhythm of the monitors, the way the night shift nurses hand off to day shift at 6:41 a.m., the exact second the coffee in the break room stops tasting fresh. Her scrubs are navy blue, standard issue, but she has cut the sleeves off 1 inch shorter than normal so they don't brush her wrists. Habit. From before. From the place that officially never happened. Dr. Marcus Pierce sees her at 5:12 a.m., standing in the medication bay, drawing up a morning infusion with the kind of precision that suggests she has done this 10,000 times. He doesn't look long. Just long enough to notice that she flinches when the metal medication tray clears, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. She steadies herself against the counter. Her hands tremble for exactly 2 seconds before she controls it. The good doctor files this observation away, the way a predator files away a prey animal's limp. Weakness is useful. Weakness is leverage. She has worked here 8 months and has never once made eye contact with him in the hallway, never once contradicted him in front of patients or families, never once raised her voice above the careful neutral register she practices daily. The perfect subordinate. Deferential. Quiet. Small. But something is different about Megan O'Brien, even if Dr. Pierce cannot quite name it. It's in the way she moves, economical, controlled, like every motion has been calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum exposure. Her face is constructed from muscle memory and discipline. She eats lunch alone in the staff kitchen at 12:17 p.m., sitting in the corner with her back against the wall, and she never looks surprised when people enter. Her eyes track the door. Always. No matter what she appears to be reading on her phone, some part of her attention remains anchored to exits and entrances. Combat medics walk like this. People who have held the arterial bleeding of strangers while helicopters thundered overhead walk like this. But Dr. Pierce doesn't know that. He simply knows that something about her registers as *other*, and that makes her vulnerable. It's the jacket that catches his eye first. Megan wears a medical staff jacket over her scrubs even when the hospital temperature hovers at 72 degrees. Navy blue, like her scrubs, standard issue, worn enough to have lost its crisply tailored shape. She wears it every shift without fail. Inside the left breast pocket, just visible when she bends, is a patch. Faded. The kind of fading that comes from 15 years of handling, of fingers touching the same spot 1,000 times. She touches it every morning at 4:53 a.m. when she passes the supply closet on the way to the cardiac wing. Her fingers find it without looking, press it for 3 seconds like a talisman, like a prayer, like a reminder of something the world has decided never happened. The patch depicts crossed rifles and a caduceus, the symbol of combat medicine. The colors have nearly dissolved into white except for the outline. She has never shown it to anyone. Nobody at Cedar Creek Medical knows it exists. Dr. Pierce doesn't know it exists either, but he notices that she touches it the way some people touch religious medals, the way soldiers touch photographs of people they have lost. Ritualistic. Protective. The gesture speaks of secrets, and secrets mean leverage, and leverage means control. This is what runs through his mind as he observes her over the first 8 months of her employment. The other nurses gossip and laugh and schedule drinks together. Megan does not. She eats her lunch in 6 minutes, charts with mechanical precision, and leaves exactly at 7:56 p.m., never staying late, never volunteering for overtime, never seeking attention. A ghost. A very competent ghost. The kind of ghost that quietly catches things other people miss. In the cardiac wing at 6:43 a.m., 3 days after Dr. Pierce first began his surveillance, Megan stands at the central monitoring station reviewing overnight admissions. The monitor in Bay 7 catches her attention, irregular variations in the rhythm she recognizes instantly. Her hand moves to the call bell. Controlled. No panic. No alarm in her voice when she speaks to the night shift nurse. Just a quiet observation about a patient that technically everyone should be monitoring but rarely does with Megan's focus. The night nurse, a woman named Sarah who has worked at Cedar Creek for 3 years, glances at the monitor and shrugs. He's been stable all night. But Megan has already left, already found the resident on duty, already guided them back to the bedside with the kind of calm authority that doesn't come from title or credentials. By the time Dr. Pierce arrives for his 7:15 a.m. rounds, the patient's arrhythmia has been corrected. Another save. Another moment of invisible competence. Another invisible threat. The first time Dr. Pierce speaks directly to Megan, it happens in the hallway outside room for 12, which will later become significant in ways neither of them could predict. A family is there, the Ramirez family, whose father, Miguel, has been admitted with chest pain and a history of arrhythmias that puts him in the cardiac wing. Mr. Ramirez is 67, a retired machinery operator, the kind of man who has worked with his hands his entire life and doesn't understand why his body is betraying him now. His daughter, his wife, his son-in-law, and his grandson crowd the small room. Megan has been checking on him every hour on the hour, taking his pulse manually even when the monitors give her numbers, the way someone trained to work without technology would do. Hands-on. Literal. Dr. Pierce sweeps into the room at 7:43 a.m. with a kind of entrance that suggests he has rehearsed it. 2 residents trail behind him, notebooks open, pens ready to document his wisdom. He spends 7 minutes with Mr. Ramirez, barely glancing at the chart Megan has meticulously prepared, barely listening to the family's questions, mostly talking about his own experience, his own training, his credentials from Johns Hopkins and a fellowship at Mayo. He is a tall man, 54, with the kind of tailored appearance that comes from inherited money rather than earned success. His watch costs more than Megan's car. His wedding band is platinum. When he leaves the room, she is standing directly behind him, notepaper in hand, ready to clarify any orders. Just a nurse, Dr. Pierce says, not to her, but to the residents trailing behind him. The words are quiet. Conversational. The kind of comment designed to travel just far enough to reach her ears. They do the basic monitoring, the hand-holding, the comfort care. It's important work. Necessary work. But let's not confuse basic competence with actual medical decision-making. He doesn't look at her when he says it. That would be too direct, too obvious. Instead, he speaks to the residents with the tone of someone sharing insider knowledge about the hospital hierarchy. The message is clear: she is furniture. Useful furniture, but furniture nonetheless. Megan doesn't respond. She has learned that responding to this kind of comment amplifies it, gives it weight and importance. Instead, she simply makes a note in Mr. Ramirez's chart, a notation about his vitals, his rhythm, his family's questions, and continues her rounds. But something has shifted. Dr. Pierce has identified her. He has seen her. And now she is on his radar in a way that is decidedly not invisible. The jacket pocket, the place where the faded unit patch rests, feels heavier somehow as she moves through the afternoon. The patch itself is a physical object, approximately 2 inches by 1.5 inches, worn olive drab threaded through with some remaining blue and red from an era when color still existed in it. It was given to her in 2009, sewn into the pocket of a medical jacket by hands that are now dust in Helmand Province. The patch came from a unit called Shadow Company, 160th SAW Task Force, based out of Fort Campbell before the consolidation. 532 personnel. 23 surgical specialists. 1 female combat medic who officially never existed. Captain Megan O'Brien, who was erased from every database the moment Operation Copper Veil was classified above top secret and buried in a section of the Pentagon where records go to be forgotten. She touches the patch at 3:17 p.m., standing in the bathroom stall on the 2nd floor, and allows herself 15 seconds of something that is not quite pain but is not quite anything else. The world has decided she doesn't exist. So she became invisible. It was simple. It was easy. It was the only way to stay alive. And for 8 months at Cedar Creek Medical, invisibility had been working perfectly. Until Dr. Marcus Pierce decided that a quiet, competent nurse with military-precise hand movements and a faded patch that she thought was hidden warranted closer observation. Until he decided that she was a problem in need of solving. Until he said words meant to diminish her in front of people who actually listened. By 6:11 p.m., when Megan clocks out and walks to her truck in the hospital parking lot, the sky above San Antonio is the color of old bruises. Thunder rolls in the distance. The rain hasn't started yet, but it's coming, the way bad things often come, with warning, with time to prepare, but always arriving anyway. She drives to the Starlight Diner on Route 90, the place where nobody knows her name, and sits in a booth in the back where she can see the door. The coffee is mediocre. The pie is acceptable. Nobody bothers her. The waitress is a woman named Rosa, who has worked there for 11 years and has the kind of face that has seen too many lonely people eating alone. Tonight, Rosa sets down the check without being asked. Rough day? Rosa asks, the kind of casual question that means she's not actually asking for a real answer. It's starting, Megan says. Just that. Just those two words. But something in the tone of them, something in the weight of them, makes Rosa refill her coffee without being asked and walk away without pushing for more information. Because Rosa has seen this before. People who speak like they know how this ends. People who are bracing for impact. The next morning, Megan arrives at 4:24 a.m., exactly on schedule, moving through Cedar Creek Medical like a ghost who has learned to become even quieter. Dr. Pierce is already there, already waiting in the hallway outside the medication bay, already watching. Dr. Pierce was already there, already waiting in the hallway outside the medication bay, already watching. He stood with his shoulders back and his chin elevated, the posture of someone accustomed to occupying space without permission. Megan moved past him with a chart in her hands, her eyes down, her movements economical. She had learned 8 months ago that invisibility required discipline. The Ramirez family occupied room for 12. Mr. Ramirez was 73, post-MI, stable but fragile, the kind of patient who needed monitoring that existed in the spaces between official rounds. His daughter sat beside the bed. His wife stood by the window. Megan had been tracking his cardiac telemetry for 40 minutes, watching the rhythm patterns trace across the monitor like a story told in electrical impulses. The pattern was changing. The intervals were shortening. The P waves were flattening. Dr. Pierce entered the room at 2:38 p.m. with the kind of entrance designed to command attention. He moved like a man whose credentials preceded him like a scent. His white coat was immaculate. His stethoscope hung at precisely the right angle. Mrs. Ramirez, he began, his voice the texture of expensive leather, I know the nurses get chatty, but let's discuss actual medical decisions with someone qualified. Megan stood at the monitor station, her finger on the pulse point of the telemetry strip. The rhythm was deteriorating. She could see it in the monitor's bright blue line, the way the peaks were clustering closer together, the pause intervals compressing like a fist tightening. These Florence Nightingales mean well, Dr. Pierce continued, addressing the family as if they were an audience at a lecture, his hand gesturing toward Megan without looking at her. But they tend to overread the data. It's understandable. They are not trained in interpretation. The monitor chime began its warning sequence. 1 soft beep. 2 soft beeps. The rhythm had shifted. Megan's hands moved. She turned the volume up on the speaker. Doctor, she said quietly. The words came out like stone dropping into still water. Your patient is in V-TAC. Pierce waved his hand without glancing at the monitor. Just a nurse overreacting. As I was saying, Mr. Ramirez, what we're looking at is a textbook recovery pattern. The medications are performing exactly as. The monitor escalated. The warning chime became an urgent shrieking pulse. Code rhythm. Cardiac chaos. The blue line on the screen began its lethal dance, the disorganized electrical storm of ventricular tachycardia translating into a body that was dying in front of them. Dr. Pierce's words stopped. His jaw tightened. He turned toward the monitor, and for exactly 1 second, his face registered the shock of being wrong in front of an audience. Megan wiped the single tear that had escaped down her cheek. She did not look away from Pierce. She did not step back. She did not apologize for being right. When you've finished performing for an audience, doctor, your patient in for 12 has been coding for 90 seconds. The room went dead silent. Mrs. Ramirez's hand covered her mouth. The daughter's eyes went wide. Dr. Pierce's face burned the color of arterial blood. He moved then, fast, shouting orders, his team rushing in like a coordinated machine. The code lasted 7 minutes. 3 rounds of epinephrine. 1 round of amiodarone. A synchronized shock at 200 joules that made Mr. Ramirez's body arch off the bed like a fish thrown onto dry ground. The rhythm converted. Sinus rhythm returned. The blue line settled into something that resembled a heartbeat again. But everyone in the room had heard her words. Everyone in the hallway had heard her words. And everyone in Cedar Creek Medical would know about those words by shift change. The next morning, Megan entered the break room at noon. She had learned the schedule. 12:15 was when the 4 other ICU nurses took their lunches simultaneously: Janet, who had worked nights for 6 years, Kim, who had 2 children in elementary school, Rodriguez, who was studying for the CRNA boards, and Chen, who had been military himself, a Marine corpsman before nursing school. They were already there, sitting at the single table the hospital provided, their lunch containers arranged in front of them like offerings. She approached with her sandwich wrapped in plastic, the same sandwich she made every morning, turkey and mustard on wheat bread, consumed without ritual or enjoyment. She said nothing. She simply moved toward the chair. All 4 of them grabbed their containers simultaneously. The movement was coordinated, practiced, planned. They filed out of the break room without acknowledging her presence. Not one of them looked at her face. Not one of them said goodbye. Janet's shoe caught on the doorframe, but she did not pause to adjust it. They left her standing alone with her untouched sandwich, the fluorescent lights humming their mechanical song overhead, and the smell of microwaved coffee growing colder in the pot. By Friday, the public write-up board near the nurses' station displayed a formal notice. The letter was printed in black ink on white paper, laminated for durability, posted at eye level so that every staff member passing through the corridor would read it. The document was official. The document was permanent. The document said, M. O'Brien, insubordination and overstepping scope of practice, final written warning. Every single person walking past could read it. Megan's name. Her alleged crime. Her professional failure, documented and displayed like a warning to anyone else who might consider stepping beyond their place. Dr. Pierce had spent the week with surgical precision. Megan watched him work, though he never acknowledged that he saw her watching. He conducted whispered conversations with the chief nursing officer in hallways where voices echoed off tile. He took the director of nursing to lunch on Wednesday, his hand on the small of her back as they walked through the cafeteria. He made phone calls from his office with the door open just enough so that his concerns about that O'Brien woman and her pattern of boundary violations and her concerning tendency to question physician judgment could drift into the hallway for whoever cared to listen. The poisoning was methodical. It was architectural. It was the work of someone who understood institutional power the way a mason understands stone, which pieces to remove, which angles to exploit, how much pressure was required to create a collapse that looked like it happened naturally. Chen was the only one who made eye contact with her on Thursday morning. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds while she was restocking the med cart. 2 seconds. That was all. But in those 2 seconds, she saw something that looked like an apology or maybe a warning or maybe both. By Saturday morning, a new patient was being transferred to the ICU. The report came through the radio in clipped professional tones: Cedar Creek Medical, this is AMR for 07. Inbound with a level 1 trauma. Male, 50s, gunshot wound to the abdomen, multiple entry and exit wounds, sustained significant blood loss in the field. ETA for minutes. Preparing ICU Bay 3. For minutes. Megan was already moving before the dispatcher finished speaking. She had heard trauma reports before. She had heard the abbreviated language of emergency medicine, the way that human catastrophe was translated into data points and medical shorthand. She had done this work before. Not here. Not in a hospital. Not in San Antonio. The doors burst open at 3:11 p.m. The patient arrived on a gurney surrounded by paramedics in blue uniforms and EMTs with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. He was unconscious. His chest was wrapped in field dressings that followed a specific pattern, the kind Megan recognized because she had applied them herself, 6,000 miles away, in the dust and heat of Bagram airfield, where the helicopters came in fast and the wounded came in faster. Her hand moved to her jacket lining. The faded unit patch was still there, stitched into the fabric, the only proof that she had ever existed in that world. Her fingers found it and held. Dr. Pierce was already shouting orders as the patient transferred from ambulance gurney to hospital bed. Get a CBC, CMP, type and cross for 8 units. Trauma surgery consult, stat. Airway team on standby. His voice was the voice of someone commanding a room, and the room responded. Residents scrambled. Nurses moved. The machinery of emergency medicine engaged. Megan was assigned to monitor vitals only. Pierce had made sure of that. She stood in the corner of the bay, one hand on the blood pressure cuff, one hand on the pulse oximeter, watching everything and touching nothing while the trauma team worked. She could read a body the way other people read books. She could see what the monitors did not yet display. She could predict what was about to fail. The patient's chest was wrapped with field dressings that Megan recognized from a specific training protocol, applied with the precision of someone military, someone trained, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Her eyes traced the bandaging pattern, and something in her chest tightened like a fist closing around her heart. But that wasn't the worst part. That afternoon, Dr. Pierce called a mandatory staff meeting in the conference room on the 3rd floor. All nursing staff were required to attend. He stood at the head of the table with a clipboard in his hands and authority radiating off him like heat off hot asphalt. His face was calm. His voice was measured. He had all the time in the world. Effective immediately, he announced, there will be new protocols governing ICU nursing staff. All invasive procedures, all clinical interventions, all assessments requiring independent judgment will require direct physician authorization before implementation. This is about patient safety. This is about maintaining proper scope of practice. His eyes found Megan across the table. They held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Some people forget they're not playing soldier anymore, he said quietly. Some people need reminding that this is a hospital, not a war zone. Some people need to remember their place. The room was perfectly silent. Megan did not look away. Megan did not flinch. Megan did not do anything except breathe, steady and even, the kind of breathing that came from knowing how to survive impossible circumstances. But at 2 a.m. that night, when the monitors showed what Megan had already predicted, when the pressure was building inside a chest that had been torn open and sewn back together in the field, when the oxygen saturation began its slow decline and the heart rate began its panic climb, she would be assigned to observe only, to watch and report, to stand in the corner while 15 doctors stood in the doorway and decided whether a man was worth saving. The admission came through at 11:36 p.m. on a Wednesday. Gunshot wound, lower abdomen, field dressed in the back of a tactical vehicle somewhere between the border and San Antonio. Captain James Cordova, Navy combat medic, incoming to Cedar Creek Medical's trauma bay. Megan saw the name on the assignment board and felt the air leave her lungs in a way that had nothing to do with breathing. She knew that name. She knew it the way you know the face of someone who walked into your life after you'd been erased from it. After Operation Copper Veil was buried. After the Pentagon made 3 phone calls and her entire existence was filed under classified and redacted from every database that mattered. Cordova had been stationed at Bagram as a junior medic when she was running field protocols for her unit. He'd replaced her. The official record said she never existed. The unofficial record said she was dead. But Cordova knew. Cordova had seen her work, learned from her techniques, inherited the knowledge she couldn't leave behind because leaving anything behind meant prison. The stretcher wheeled past the observation window and Megan caught sight of the field dressing. Her hands went cold. That pattern. That specific wrap configuration, tourniquet placement, pressure point coverage, the way the elastic was angled at exactly 45 degrees, that wasn't standard protocol. That was her protocol. The one she'd developed in 2015 during Operation Copper Veil when the standard tourniquet technique was failing in the Helmand Valley dust. That was the technique she'd taught to 3 medics before she vanished. Cordova must have been one of them. Or he'd learned it from someone who'd learned it from her ghost. She moved toward the trauma bay on automatic, the way muscle memory worked when the conscious mind was still catching up. Dr. Pierce was already there, surrounded by his entourage, not his actual ICU team, but the rotating roster of residents and fellows who orbited him like planets around a dying star. The badge readers flickered as they entered. The equipment trays were positioned before Cordova's chest was even fully exposed. Everything clinical. Everything controlled. Everything that had nothing to do with the fact that the man on the stretcher was breathing like a man learning to survive. GSW, left lower quadrant, the paramedic reported, voice steady with the practiced calm of someone who'd said this 100 times. Entry wound 2 centimeters left of midline, no exit. Vital stable during transport. O2 sat 94%, heart rate 88, blood pressure 118/70. 2 large bore 4s running normal saline at wide open. Megan stepped to the monitor and watched the oxygen saturation number glow, 94. 94, 94. Then it wasn't. The oxygen saturation dropped to 92 as she was pulling on sterile gloves. A single decimal point, nothing urgent, nothing that would cause anyone except her to notice that the curve of his breathing had changed. One side of his chest was rising fully with each breath. The other side was barely moving. Rising like something reluctant, something fighting against pressure it shouldn't be feeling. Dr. Pierce was scanning the wound with the focus of a man accustomed to being right. His fingers prodded the area around the entry point, the practiced touch of someone who'd done this procedure 1,000 times in a controlled setting with all the time in the world. Cordova's eyes flickered but didn't open. The sedation was working. Everything was working except the left side of his chest, which was beginning to look flatter than it should, the rib cage losing definition like air was being stolen from inside. The oxygen saturation dropped to 90. Then 89. The monitor began to emit small warning beeps, the kind that were easy to ignore if you weren't listening for them, if you hadn't spent for years listening for the exact pitch of a patient beginning to fail. Megan's jaw tightened. She could feel it now, the tension in the room, the barely perceptible shift in pressure that meant air was trapped somewhere it shouldn't be, collapsing the lung from the inside, pushing against the heart like a fist. "I need a chest X-ray," Dr. Pierce announced, straightening up. "We need imaging before any intervention. Protocol is to identify before we operate." "His oxygen is dropping," Megan said. The words came out level. Controlled. The way she'd learned to speak in circumstances where panic was a luxury nobody could afford. 89% now. His breath sounds are diminished on the left side only. Classic presentation for tension pneumothorax. Dr. Pierce turned slowly to face her. His eyes were the color of ice water. The 15 other doctors who'd filed into the ICU behind him shifted their weight almost imperceptibly, a coordinated movement that reminded Megan of predators recognizing the presence of something weaker in the territory. 15. She counted them without looking directly. It was a deliberate show of force. It was a message. It was a warning wrapped in credentials. "Are you suggesting I perform a blind procedure based on a hunch?" Dr. Pierce's voice could have frozen boiling water. "You're a nurse, Ms. O'Brien. You observe. You report. You do not diagnose. You do not suggest invasive interventions. Is that clear?" Megan did not respond. She did not flinch. She did not do anything except keep her eyes on the monitor as the oxygen saturation dropped to 87. Her hands were moving without her permission, reaching for the supply cart, fingers finding the 14-gauge needle by muscle memory alone, the same muscle memory that had kept her alive in sandstorms and under fire when the alternative was letting someone die because protocol was slower than death. "Get the chest X-ray," Dr. Pierce commanded. He was already turning toward the door, the 15 doctors creating a corridor for him to walk through, their clipboards held like shields across their chests, their eyes averted from the stretcher, the kind of avoidance that came from knowing you were choosing not to see something crucial. Cordova's lips were beginning to turn gray. Not blue yet, but getting there. The kind of color change that meant the oxygen being pumped through his bloodstream was losing the battle against the carbon dioxide being trapped in his collapsed lung. 85%. The number glowed on the monitor like a countdown. Megan reached for the corner of the supply cart and found the plastic package containing the needle decompression kit. It was sealed. It was sterile. It was completely unauthorized. She broke the seal anyway. The room went electric. Not with sound, there was barely any sound at all, just the whisper of plastic packaging being opened, the soft click of a needle cap being removed, the almost inaudible hiss of preparation. But the silence itself had changed texture, had become the kind of silence that happens in the moment before something irreversible occurs. One of the 15 doctors stopped walking. Then another. Then all of them turned, and Megan felt the weight of their collective attention like a physical force. Dr. Pierce was 2 steps from the door. He froze. His shoulders tense beneath his white coat like he was considering whether to continue walking or turn around and assert dominance. The hesitation lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than when it was loud. Quiet voices were the ones that carried threats. "My job," Megan said. She had the needle positioned at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the anatomically perfect location for needle decompression. Her hands were steady as a surgical laser. Her breathing was even. The trembling wasn't fear. The trembling was restraint, the same restraint she'd learned to weaponize across 3 tours in Helmand province. Cordova's chest stopped rising on the left side altogether now. The monitor was screaming its quiet digital scream. 84%. 83. The heart rate had climbed to 142. The blood pressure was beginning to slip. Every second that they waited for an X-ray was a second that the pressure inside his chest cavity was increasing, was crushing the lung smaller, was pushing the heart into a position where it couldn't pump. "Step away from the patient," Dr. Pierce said. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the certainty of a man who'd never been disobeyed. But Megan was already moving. The needle slid through skin, through muscle, through the intercostal membrane, and into the space where air had no business being. The resistance lasted half a second. Then there was the distinctive hiss of air escaping, the sound of pressure equalizing, the audible rush of something being released from where it had been trapped and suffocating everything around it. Cordova's left side of his chest expanded. The oxygen saturation climbed, 88. 91, 94. 97, the heart rate began to normalize. The blood pressure stabilized. The dying man on the stretcher began breathing like someone who'd just been given back his life. The 15 doctors were absolutely motionless. Dr. Pierce's face was a color Megan had never seen before, a shade that suggested both rage and something worse, the awareness that he'd been wrong, that his authority had been meaningless, that a nurse he'd spent 2 weeks publicly destroying had just saved a patient while he was walking toward the door to order an X-ray that would have been taken after the man was already dead. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then he turned and walked out of the ICU without saying a single word. The other 14 doctors followed, filing out like an army in retreat, leaving Megan alone with the monitors and the patient and the faded unit patch that she could feel pressing against her ribs beneath her scrubs, the one piece of proof that she'd ever existed in the world Cordova had inherited when she vanished. She placed the decompression needle in the sharps container and wiped her hands on her scrubs. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. Not anymore. 15 doctors stood frozen in the ICU doorway, their clipboards raised like shields, their liability concerns louder than Cordova's oxygen alarm. The monitor screamed. The distinctive pattern flickered across the screen: tension pneumothorax, the collapsed lung that kills faster than most people can say goodbye. Dr. Pierce spun around from the far wall, his face already darkening. "O'Brien, step away from that patient. That is a direct order." Megan didn't hesitate. She didn't blink. She moved. Her hands found Cordova's gown and ripped it open, the fabric tearing with a sound like breaking glass underwater. The antiseptic smell of his skin met her fingertips, cold, clammy, the texture of someone whose body was already shutting down. She counted the intercostal spaces with her fingers, muscle memory taking over from somewhere deeper than thought, from 18 months at Bagram when hesitation meant somebody's daughter didn't come home. Second space. Midclavicular line. She knew this anatomy better than she knew her own name. "I will have you arrested," Pierce screamed, his voice cracking with a sound like gravel in a diesel engine. "Security! Security, now!" Her hands were already moving. The 14-gauge angiocath needle lay on the crash cart where she'd positioned it 3 minutes ago, when the senior resident still insisted on waiting for the portable chest X-ray, when the attending didn't see what was obvious in Cordova's breath sounds and the way his neck veins were bulging like they might tear through the skin. The needle was cold and precise, the kind of instrument that felt like an extension of her body. She'd driven similar needles into bodies in darkness, in sandstorms, with incoming rounds bracketing the tent. Cordova's chest rose and fell in desperate, insufficient breaths. 84% oxygen saturation. The monitor beeped its terrified rhythm. 15 doctors watched. Not one moved. Not one spoke. She could feel their eyes like weight pressing down, the paralysis of institutional fear, the calculus of malpractice insurance and professional liability that made them into statues while a man died 3 feet away. Megan inserted the needle at the exact angle, the exact depth. No hesitation. No second guessing. The needle punctured the pleural space with a tactile sensation she felt in her bone marrow, not pain, not anymore, just information. Data. The needle advanced past the parietal pleura and struck the pressurized pocket of air that was suffocating him from the inside. The air escaped. Hiss. The sound filled the silence of their cowardice, the hiss of death backing away, the catastrophe pausing long enough for life to happen. Cordova's chest inflated with an audible rush, like someone taking their first breath after drowning. His oxygen saturation climbed, 86, 89, 92. The monitor beeping accelerated, then steadied. 95%. Stable. The trembling in his shoulders stopped. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. Alive. Dr. Pierce's face went from purple to a shade of red that didn't have a color name. He pointed at Megan like he was calling down divine punishment. "You overstepped. You overstepped every protocol, every chain of command, every security is on their way." He said it like it was a curse. His hands were shaking. His professional superiority, his credentials, his authority, all of it had just been obliterated by a woman in wrinkled scrubs who'd made the decision he couldn't make. She'd saved a man's life while he stood paralyzed by procedure. Megan didn't look at him. She was already calling for the chest tube kit, already documenting the procedure, already moving into the next phase of rescue. The young resident finally stepped forward, his voice small. "I should have, why didn't I?" She didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wasn't already written in Cordova's returning oxygen saturation, in the color coming back to his lips. The room smelled like fierce wet and antiseptic and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Sound was crystalline and sharp, the monitor's steady beeping, the whoosh of the ventilator, the shuffle of the 15 doctors backing away from the doors like they'd just watched something they weren't supposed to see. Because they had. They'd watched a nurse execute a procedure that should have required 5 minutes of discussion, authorization from 2 attending physicians, and a risk management review. She'd done it in 43 seconds. Pierce retreated to his office at 2:08 p.m. Megan saw him through the glass partition, his office door slamming hard enough that the sound carried through the entire ICU. 20 minutes later, she heard him making phone calls, his voice low and measured and dangerous in a different way than anger. Strategic. Calculated. The voice of someone who understood that direct retaliation would only make him look worse. The first call was to Chief of Staff Reynolds. Megan only caught fragments, completely inappropriate, clear documentation of insubordination, liability exposure. Pierce's tone was ice and professionalism, the voice of a man wrapping his revenge in institutional language. The second call was to Hospital Legal, 30 minutes later. The legal department, Pierce had connections there. Megan knew this from the way his shoulders relaxed slightly after that conversation ended. Liability language. Scope of practice violations. Something about establishing a pattern of behavior. The third call came at 3:15 p.m. to Security Services. This one was shortest. This one was the real move. He wasn't shouting. He was just stating facts, the way a commander would order an airstrike. By 3:53 p.m., her badge deactivated when she tried to scan out of the ICU. The security guard's name was Martinez, and he wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Captain. I'm sorry. I just need to walk you to your locker." His hands were positioned carefully, not aggressive, but ready. She could read the stance immediately. Combat training. Military background. Ex-Navy, probably, he had that bearing. He would have heard the rumors about her, the same ones everyone else had heard. But he didn't know yet. None of them did. Her locker had been cleaned out already. Her personal belongings, the photo of her unit at Bagram, the coffee mug that said hemoglobin donor, the sweatshirt from Walter Reed, all packed into a cardboard box with her name printed on it in block letters. The efficiency of it was chilling. Pierce had planned this. Not improvised, not reactive. Planned. "There's a trespassing warning filed," Martinez said quietly. "Chief of Staff Reynolds signed off on your termination paperwork. You're not to return to Cedar Creek Medical property. Security will need to escort you off the grounds now." She nodded. She didn't ask questions. She didn't protest. She just picked up the box and walked out, Martinez's presence like a shadow beside her. The parking lot was empty except for her 2008 Honda Civic, the nothing car, the invisible car, the car that belonged to someone who wanted to disappear. She loaded the box into the back seat and drove without destination. The Starlight Diner on Route 90 was open at 3 a.m., the way it always was. The parking lot had 3 other cars, all of them belonged to people who were either starting their day or ending their night with no particular hope in between. Megan sat in a corner booth, the vinyl seat cracked and stained with coffee rings that had been there long enough to become part of the furniture. She ordered a black coffee that the server, a woman named Denise with 40 years of exhaustion in her eyes, poured from a pot that had probably been warming since midnight. The coffee turned cold in the white ceramic cup. Her reflection stared back from the black window, the glass transforming the diner interior into a dark mirror. She looked like a ghost. She looked like someone who'd already died and hadn't been notified. She looked like someone the government had erased after Operation Copper Veil was buried so deep that even the satellites couldn't find it. The orders had been explicit: disappear. Don't surface. You don't exist. Officially, she'd never served. Never bled. Never gone through the ice water immersion training that taught you how to survive when your body was shutting down. Never held a dying soldier's hand while their blood cooled on her palms. She'd never existed beyond the scrubs and the smile. And surfacing meant prison. Or worse. The kind of worse that didn't have a name, that the Pentagon kept in files stamped compartmentalized, that would make sure she vanished not as a ghost but as a person who was never born. She'd saved a captain's life today. A Navy captain. Someone with a rank, someone with a record, someone whose survival would probably generate paperwork. She'd committed a crime or multiple crimes, actually. Operating outside her scope of practice. Defying a physician's direct order. Performing an advanced procedure without authorization. Insubordination. Assault on the professional hierarchy. She'd done exactly what the government trained her to do. The coffee cup sat in front of her, untouched now for 40 minutes, the surface filmed with that thin skin of cooled oil and resignation. Outside, Route 90 was empty. A truck passed every few minutes, the roar of the engine briefly replacing silence, then the silence returned, heavier. The fluorescent lights hummed their sodium hum, that sound that only exists in places where hope goes to die. Megan touched the inside of her jacket, feeling for the faded unit patch she'd sewn into the lining years ago. The cloth was soft now from endless touching, worn thin in places from her fingers returning to it during dark moments. The patch was all she had. The only proof that she'd ever existed in that world, that those 18 months at Bagram weren't a delusion, that she'd saved lives that no one would ever acknowledge. She was still touching it when her phone rang. It wasn't a number she recognized. But it was the right area code. San Antonio. Hospital District. She answered and listened to Martinez's voice, quiet and careful. "Captain, you should know, your patient just woke up." Captain Cordova's eyes opened at dawn, the morning light catching the edge of his ICU bed like a benediction. His lips moved, forming a single word with the precision of someone who had practiced it through sedation and pain: Valkyrie. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The ventilator hissed. And the ceiling-mounted camera captured every syllable of her call sign in perfect resolution, time-stamped at 05 for 7 hours, the moment her erasure ended. The secure fax arrived at Cedar Creek Medical's administrative office at 0832 hours. Hospital IT specialist Chen carried it personally to the boardroom, a Marine veteran with an eagle, globe and anchor tattoo visible on his forearm, the kind of man who understood institutional loyalty. The citation was official, letterhead bearing the Department of Defense seal, Captain Megan Elizabeth O'Brien, United States Navy Medical Corps, for extraordinary heroism under fire during classified operations conducted in active combat theater. 2 tours. 47 combat missions. Wounded during Operation Copper Veil. Officially erased for operational security purposes. Ordered into civilian life for her own protection. The words sat on the paper like a resurrection. Like proof. Like someone finally saying she had existed. Dr. Pierce received the news through Chief Reynolds in the ICU corridor, his face draining of color as the implications cascaded through his carefully constructed architecture of power. He shoved through the gathering staff, nurses, residents, respiratory therapists, his mouth working before his brain caught up. His voice came out purple and fractured, echoing off the antiseptic walls like a man watching his empire collapse in real time. This is fraud. Fantasy. She's claiming military service she never had. This is, he gestured wildly at the fax Reynolds held, his hands shaking. This is a fabrication. I demand an investigation. General David Webb arrived by noon, his staff car pulling into the Cedar Creek Medical loading dock with the kind of purpose that made security personnel step aside without questions. 2 stars on his shoulders. Dress blues with campaign ribbons the color of dried blood and old wars. He moved through the corridors like gravity itself bent toward him, his aide carrying a leather dispatch case and something else, a dress uniform, navy whites, neatly folded and pressed, insignia already affixed. Megan stood in the ICU corridor in her scrubs, the same scrubs she'd worn while dying slowly in a diner at 3 in the morning, while her coffee went cold and her reflection showed nothing but a ghost. General Webb stepped in front of her. His eyes were the color of a winter Atlantic, and when he spoke, his voice moved the air like a tank idling in a garage, steady and heavy and impossible to misunderstand. Captain O'Brien. It is my profound honor. He took the dress uniform from his aide. I believe this belongs to you. She changed in the locker room. Hands that had performed needle decompressions and held arterial bleeds now fastened the buttons of her own uniform for the first time in 432 days. The fabric felt like remembering. The insignia on her collar caught the fluorescent light, 2 silver bars, the rank of captain, official and unmistakable. Her mother had sewn a faded unit patch inside her jacket lining as a prayer. The Navy was returning her to herself with medals pinned to her chest. The silver star came first. General Webb held it up so the ICU staff could see, the white ribbon with its 5 blue stars catching the light like captured starlight. For extraordinary heroism under fire. He pinned it to her dress blues. The puncture of the post through the fabric sounded like truth finally breaking through silence. The purple heart followed. 2 of them, actually, 1 for each wound the government had officially never authorized her to receive. Webb pinned them with the gravity of someone honoring the dead and the living simultaneously. Service that cost you. Service that mattered. Captain Cordova watched from his bed, still tethered to the ventilator by tubes and necessity. His eyes tracked every movement. When Webb finished the final pin, Cordova raised his right hand, the one without the arterial line, and saluted from his pillow, a gesture awkward and perfect in equal measure. His voice came out as a rasp. "She trained me, sir. Everything I knew out there. Everything that kept me alive. That's Valkyrie." Dr. Pierce backed toward the ICU exit, his backward shuffle the posture of a man watching the walls he'd built turn to sand. General Webb turned his full attention toward him, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I understand you terminated Captain O'Brien's employment yesterday. She violated protocol. She operated outside her scope of. She saved a patient's life while 15 physicians stood watching." Webb's voice could cut steel. It could cut through explanations and justifications and institutional cowardice. "Where is the security footage?" Pierce's face went the color of drywall. "I would need to check with IT. We have retention policies I was going to review." Chen stepped forward. The Marine veteran had been waiting in the corridor the entire time, tablet in his hands, with the satisfied expression of someone who had anticipated exactly this moment. He'd archived every frame of the ICU security footage. He'd time-stamped every phone call Pierce had made to Chief Reynolds and the legal department before Cordova was stable, before his O2 sat climbed back above 90, before he could draw a breath without the ventilator's mechanical assistance. The recordings were pristine. Crystal clear. A perfect record of sabotage in real time. "Semper Fi means we protect our own, Doctor," Chen said quietly, and the words fell into the silence like a coffin lid closing. Chief Reynolds suddenly became very interested in his shoes. The board of directors materialized from various corners of the hospital, requesting Pierce's immediate presence, their voices professional and cold. The IT department was being contacted about his previous attempts to delete footage. Legal was reviewing his phone calls and his termination procedures. The medical board wanted his file. His credentials. His everything. Pierce left Cedar Creek Medical in his own car, driving himself toward whatever institutional reckoning awaited him. By week 3, his medical license was under investigation. By month 3, it was suspended pending review. By month 6, he had accepted a position with a medical supply distribution company, wearing a polo shirt with a company logo and hauling boxes of gauze and catheters from a van. 6 months passed. The season changed. Autumn burned through San Antonio, and Megan O'Brien walked through Cedar Creek Medical's main entrance in Navy captain's dress blues, the silver star and purple heart catching the fluorescent light like tiny mirrors, reflecting her back to herself. She had been reinstated with full back pay. She had been promoted to Director of Combat Medicine Training for the San Antonio Military Medical District. The position came with an office. With authority. With the right to teach the next generation of corpsmen how to stop the bleeding in places where the world wanted them to fail. The staff lined the corridors as she walked. Janet and Kim and Rodriguez and Chen, the same nurses who had abandoned her in the break room, who had watched her name appear on the write-up board, who had chosen silence when silence meant complicity. They nodded now. They moved aside. They let her pass with the respect reserved for people who had already survived the worst. At the loading dock, a medical supply van was parked in the shade. Dr. Pierce climbed out wearing a navy blue polo shirt with a company logo stitched across the chest. His face had hollowed out over 6 months of realignment. When he looked up and saw her walking past in her dress blues, he froze mid-motion, his hand still gripping a box of catheters, his entire body suddenly very still. Megan didn't stop. Didn't acknowledge him. Didn't break stride. She simply touched the unit patch now framed on her office wall as she passed him, that faded piece of fabric she had kept hidden inside her jacket lining for 432 days, proof of a life the government had tried to erase. Cordova's signature was scrawled beneath it in silver ink, "To Valkyrie, you taught me to be brave. J.C." Her new office overlooked the hospital courtyard. 23 combat medic trainees would sit in the adjacent classroom, young corpsmen preparing for deployment to the same places she had bled, the same mountains and deserts and kill zones where her hands had learned to move faster than fear. She prepared the training materials with the methodical focus of someone who had already done this in sandstorms and under fire, only now doing it with permission and authority. She touched the frame one more time. The diner at 3 in the morning. The cold coffee. The ghost in the window. The government that had ordered her into erasure and now called her captain again. The recognition that came too late and changed nothing, yet changed everything. Finally, she let herself smile. The smile was small. The smile was quiet. The smile was the sound of someone understanding that the loudest victories happen in silence, that the most dangerous person in the room is always the one nobody expected to survive. She walked into the training classroom, 23 faces turning toward her, their eyes widening slightly at the medals, the uniform, the absolute authority in her posture. She closed the door behind her and began to teach them how to be brave in places that required bravery. Her reflection in the glass was sharp and whole and undeniably, impossibly real. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. If you found yourself wondering what you would do in Megan's position, if you would have saved your patient or walked away, I want to hear about it. Subscribe to see more stories like this, stories about the quiet warriors we pass every day without knowing their real names. Like the video if it resonated with you. And comment below, if your leadership had tried to erase you the way Megan was erased, would you have gone back to that hospital? Would you have let them pin those medals on your chest, or would you have walked away forever? I'm reading every single comment.